As you may know, Donald Trump is, as he would say it, a bad hombre. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, his disastrous policies had undoubtedly led to the deaths of thousands more Americans than there needed to be. But when he was revealed to have contracted the deadly coronavirus himself, the respectable establishment came out with their thoughts and prayers and scolded those of us who were happy about Trump's infection. Now, we all know what the nice thing to do is, but seriously, is it really that wrong to want the guy out of the picture? Alright, some context here. Trump's mismanagement of the coronavirus pandemic has led to the deaths of over 215,000 Americans and counting. He's repeatedly subverted the authority of scientists and well-known facts, and his refusal to take appropriate precautions repeatedly endangers those around him. So when he, along with 35 others, was revealed to have contracted coronavirus after an unsafe event on the White House lawn, well, many of us just said, it is what it is. Meanwhile, the establishment was quick to take the high road by offering their totally not useless prayers. But are we sure he really deserves them? The question is pretty complex and is probably best tackled as multiple questions rolled into one. Should we apply a consistent ethical principle, or do we treat people based on what they have said about others? Is this about someone deserving to suffer, or is it about getting a better result? And is it really suffering we're looking for in justice, or would a painless death be preferable? Is there some middle ground where apathy is the right answer? Is there a difference between wishing for something to happen without actually going out and doing it yourself? Well, first, let's address some shit arguments. Those lines of reasoning so bad, you might as well just cut a hole in the middle of your mask so your mouth can breathe. An opinion piece by Eugene Robinson in the Washington Post says,
"This is no moment for Schadenfreude. It is, however, a time for consequences. On a human level, we have to wish every COVID-19 victim a speedy and complete recovery, including the president."
Well, that sounds pretty deep, but if we scratch our tiny heads and think about it, all he really said was that my morals are human, which clearly isn't even true since our justice system is basically built on two things, money and revenge. And when forces like those are in play, humanity gets ugly real fast. Ultimately, virtue ethics doesn't help anybody but those who get to feel better about themselves by morally posturing and pretending their prayers are remotely helpful. Piers Morgan gave a similar take, tweeting that
those who are happy about the president's COVID diagnosis are no better than the man himself.
Only problem, Piers Morgan is a fucking idiot. There's a difference between a guy who conducts drone strikes left and right, fights to take away our healthcare during a pandemic, and sides with police against the black people they brutalize, and, someone who hasn't killed hundreds of thousands of people, but simply just wants Trump's rampage to stop one way or another. In no way are these remotely comparable, especially when we go by any consistent ethical principles. One of the most common measures of morality is deontology. Basically the toddler's version of Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. The golden rule states, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Well, if conservatives believe that poor people and minor offenders deserve everything they suffer because they brought their situation upon themselves, the least we could do is to hold them to their own fucking standard.
But if you want Trump gone, doesn't that mean others should wish for your death?
Well, that's kind of like trying the executioner for murder, isn't it? I guess the right answer to fit with the golden rule is that Trump definitely deserves to die, but nobody's allowed to actually think that. Point is, the level of mental gymnastics needed to excuse Trump is amazing.
Wait a minute, isn't Joe Biden himself a mass murderer at this point too?
Well, that brings us past deontology to an actually good ethical system, consequentialism. Let's run the simulation. Consequentialism basically posits if it ends up causing bad things, it's bad. Given that all of the potential presidents at this point are trigger-happy warhawks, we need to be looking for the lesser of three evils. Trump, having recovered from COVID, has resumed his maskless rallies. I don't particularly care if every last one of Trump's sycophants dies off. After all, they're a bunch of retarded super spreaders our gene pool is better off without. But they're far less of a menace to society when their glorious leader isn't there to shepherd them. Yes, Mike Pence is also an anti-scientific prick, but I'd much rather take him for a month before Mr. Lesser of Two Evils in all situations steps in than what's happening now, where we might even face 4 more years of Trump. But the virtue-signaling liberals are right about one thing. Schadenfreude alone isn't enough to celebrate Trump's misfortunes. Our humanism does dictate that pain is a bad thing, but the suffering of one may spare the suffering of many. By now, it's pretty unambiguous. Donald Trump's continued survival spells unnecessary doom for thousands more undeserving Americans. Joe Biden's decision to pull attack ads on Trump is not virtuous. We must do everything we can to get Trump out of power, and if we let up for 1 second because you felt bad about a guy who's ideologically a literal fascist, you might end up handing him another 4 years. Not only is that stupid and cowardly, it's also an insult to the gravity of the situation. If you saw the news about Trump's positive test and felt guilty about smiling, don't be. If you felt sorry for him, you're wasting your pity on a guy who kicks the weak while they're down. And if you think you're better than us for wishing Trump well, you can sit happily in your chains as the fascists take power, knowing you did the right thing. Well, that's 3, or more like 2 and some leftovers, videos about Trump's COVID diagnosis. I wanted to make it more clear what my philosophical basis for it is, since I've strayed a bit from that these past couple months. My schedule is more packed by the week, so I might be releasing some smaller and simpler videos if our cancer's news cycle can afford me that. I'll see you next week for the last presidential debate, unless that gets canceled too.
I'm and I approve this message.